Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that can shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 44-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Cathy, 52-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum. And change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present. Cathy, hello. Here we are at the back end of our first season. It's so exciting.
I can't believe it. I kind of, it's a little bit like it's been a bit of a dream, you know? This
Yeah.
is something that we've talked about for so long. Like, I feel like it was something that we were talking about that very first night that we met each other in person. And I can remember we were sitting in your hotel room or my hotel room. We'd been out for dinner and we'd had a drink at Slim's, I think.
Yes.
And we were both incredibly nervous about what the next day was going to be, but excited, even though we'd been on staff for 3 or 4 months at that point. But it was,
It was our first time in the office in Sydney in our big girl jobs.
yes, and in our big girl jobs, in our exciting, moment.
Yes.
And we were both really nervous, but we were like, I can remember back then we were talking about this is something that we wanted to do. So
A podcast.
I'm really proud of us for
Yeah.
actually getting it off the ground and getting it done.
Yes.
And yeah, we've had 10 fabulous episodes.
Yes. With some really, really interesting women who every single one has been so different, has had very different stories to tell. And I feel like every time I spoke with them, I always, and this is the thing about podcasting, I think this is why women love podcasts, is that when you listen to a good podcast, it's like listening to a great chat with someone inspiring or interesting, and you always come away feeling better about the world generally, rather than having a doom scroll on your phone, etc. It's like an engaging chat. So it's been so lovely to do that together and with all these brilliant women. Hard to beat.
And it's hard to pick out a favorite moment. Like, I
Yes.
certainly, there's moments in every single episode, and this is our our bonus drop
Our
for
summary,
everybody.
season summary. Mm-hmm.
So we certainly will not be recapping every single episode
No, go back
because
and listen.
it will take us far too long. What are some of the highlights? Like, what are your top 2 highlights
Top
or
two.
takeaways?
Okay. When we spoke about this and I thought about it, it is really hard. But I think there were two things, and they're both quite similar theme wise, I wanted to bring up. I'll just say one, and then you can tell me yours. And then,
Sure.
okay. So my first one is Kath Mahoney, who we had on. She's sparkly, wonderful diamond of a woman from the UK. She's a
With
writer.
the most
Yeah.
magnificent red lippy.
Yes, gorge. Yeah, makes me want to go out and buy a Dior lipstick. And she spoke about divorce because she has been through
Yep.
it. And I reflected on that interview actually and thought I was a little bit brash about I felt like because I haven't been through divorce myself, I did feel I perhaps didn't give it the brevity that it deserved. So I'm sorry to anyone that's been through divorce that felt that if I interpreted my own response to her. And I think it is a really hard thing to go through relationship breakdown. But what I really took away apart from that was that she spoke about new beginnings. And when you are divorced or you go through a relationship breakdown, you look to the future and you have this sense of like, what next? The adventure's still continuing. And I think that that's something, as a married person, it's kind of harder to see because although we have adventures in many other ways, it's not just about, who your partner is. I think listening to her, I was like, "Yeah, that's such a great point. That's so exciting to think." And I know there's a lot of chat about how divorce is kind of like this buzzword at the moment. A lot of women are going
Mm.
through divorces, and when we spoke to Amy about falling in love with Laura and starting a new life and having a new identity in yourself as a single person again, and then as a person in a new relationship, there's something very alluring, right, about starting afresh. And I think that I don't wanna end my marriage after
Mhm.
after
No.
that. No, I'm very happily married, but it just made me think, "Wow, how can I find that sense of
Yeah.
adventure and new beginnings in other areas of my life?" So I really like that. I like the idea that being over 50, being divorced, it's not the end, it's a new beginning, and I thought that was awesome. I really liked her attitude. What about you?
If I can give you a little bit of hope,
Mm,
about how you might find that when
yes.
you are still in a happy marriage, when your kids get to the age my kids are at, a little
Yeah.
bit like Bron in the otherhood, my darling husband and I actually have to rediscover each other all over again and
Mm,
almost start dating again in a different way. Obviously, at a
yeah.
very different time in our lives. We're both much older. We obviously different priorities. When we were younger, it was all footloose and fancy free, and to some degree, we're footloose and fancy free again.
Mm,
But we're older and we're a little bit wiser,
mm,
and so you do get that opportunity to kind of rediscover yourself again in a different way, I guess is
yeah.
what I'm trying to say. Like,
Mm.
that's not
You don't need to do it alone in the sense that,
no.
yeah, you can do it as a couple.
You can do it as a
Yeah,
couple or you
yeah,
can do it alone.
for
I mean,
sure. Mm.
you can do the Lorelei Gilmore, um, in that the 4 episodes that they did, like, they brought back Gilmore Girls and they did like, there was like summer, spring, winter, autumn or whatever,
I
and I
confess I'm not a Gilmore Girl person, so
oh,
yes,
okay.
it's a
So
TV show
anyway,
for anyone
it
that doesn't
is,
know,
yeah.
like me.
Um, and I loved it. And in the last episode, and I don't know which order that they came in,
Mhm,
Lorelai went off to discover herself because
mm.
she didn't think she knew who she was. She knew she loved Luke, even though Luke and her had broken up a million times and got back together and all of those things as they do in TV shows. She knew she loved Luke, but she went off and she was going to do the walk. There was that book by Cheryl Strayed,
Oh, is it called Wild?
Wild, and
Yes,
there's a walk that
yes.
women go and do to discover themselves, and
Oh,
that's what Lorelai did but she didn't actually end up actually going on the walk. She just went there and realized she didn't need to do the walk to discover who she was.
yeah, but I
So
love
there's
that.
lots of
Yeah,
ways that,
yeah.
like you don't have to get a divorce,
No.
and that's not in any way diminishing or dismissing
Mm.
that as a huge monumental change.
Like, travel with your kids, travel with your partner. There's many ways, and I suppose Kath's sense of, like, this is not the end, and that she didn't
Mhm.
know how her life was going to end, because I think you kind of when you're in a marriage, especially when you've got little kids, it all feels very monotonous, and you're like, "Oh, right, this is
Mhm.
it now. This is me for life." And I think that can feel quite, well, a bit scary and a bit kind of confronting and a bit suffocating, perhaps, that you're like, this is it. This is the rest of my life. But actually, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be. You can mix it up in other ways. And I think that that's something to think about, however you choose to do that. A good learning and a good thing to keep in mind when you're getting a bit depressed about getting old and, the things. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I will go on that walk. Mm.
Mm, mm, I won't join you. I will say I
Look,
will not
I don't think
join
my
you.
hips would survive, but yeah, yeah. All right. Well, what was your takeaway?
Um,
First one.
Look, there were many.
Mm.
For me, look, we all know that change is my kryptonite, and I don't make any secret of that, even though I've had a number of people reach out to me and say, like, that's just absolutely ridiculous that you say that because look at you. you're starting a podcast, you're doing all of these things,
New
and
job. Mhm.
you so I'm constantly changing and I'm constantly evolving. So, and even tonight, someone said that I look like I'm doing everything effortlessly.
Love that.
And I
Mm.
said, let me assure you, the balls are dropping on my head on a regular basis. So there is nothing effortless about this. So apologies to anybody who actually thinks that this is seamless for me. It really isn't. That is
Mm.
very much a social media lens on my life.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't actually something that was said in an episode.
Mhm.
It's around the privilege of aging. Even
Mm.
though I do feel that I am still a little bit invisible, in some ways, in other ways, quite visible, quite, quite out there. But there's a real privilege in aging.
Mm.
And that was brought home when we posted our episode with Teresa.
Mm.
And the day after we posted our episode, her dear friend that she spoke about, her
Mm.
soulmate, she
Mm.
called her friend, a platonic soulmate. And that's probably something I'd really love to explore in future episodes and seasons around that,
Mm.
how the importance of friendship. But her platonic soulmate died suddenly.
Mm. Mm.
And she was only 50. And it really made me think and reflect that being invisible doesn't matter.
Mm.
It doesn't matter about any of those things. It matters that you were loved
Mm.
and that you had good people around you. And Teresa spoke really highly of her friend who left an incredibly legacy on the world as well. She was an
Mm.
organ donor. So it really made me reflect on that privilege of aging. It's not something that everybody gets. So to moan that I feel invisible is also a privilege.
Mm.
Um, because yeah, I don't think that everyone gets that. And
Mm.
that was kind of it just really made me sort of think, bit of a mental note, head check.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think, gosh, it's a stark reminder when you hear of people, close friends, family members passing away so young, and you think, why am I worrying about my chin hairs and all the silly things that
Mhm.
you worry about, or not being as successful as I thought I would be at this age, or whatever, whatever
Mm,
nonsense you current, is going around your brain, and then you think, well, yeah, it's a good reminder that yes, aging is a privilege, and we are lucky if we get to see our kids grow up and be there at
mm,
their
mm,
milestones and all the things. So yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on the subject of visibility and invisibility, I think what also that Teresa's episode made me think about and is how visible we are to each other. And I think that you sort
mm,
of, we as women, it's all I just find women of our age and above and, women of every age really, but specifically in our midlife to be so interesting, so visible, and maybe we are invisible to advertisers or young men or whatever.
mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah, it's sort of interesting, I think, that we can all see each other so clearly, and I think that's been a bit of a learning,
Absolutely.
yeah, along this podcast journey.
And I think Jessie's reflection around International Women's Day was also it wraps that up a little bit that really as women we need to support each other more and stop tearing each other down.
Mm.
So we can often be seen in our close friend circle. When you look a little bit wider, women can be each other's worst enemies. There's space for all of us at the
Mhm.
table,
Mm.
and the table just gets bigger. Jessie's got a real point there that we just need to support each other a bit more and stop tearing each other down.
Mm.
Not that we do that, not that they do that, but I
No.
think it's a general comment
Mm.
around I think that's ties in with that whole visibility of friendship and, we can often be really supportive of our close friends, but
Mm.
it's very easy to sort of that that next circle out or that next circle out to kind of go, "Oh, if only."
Bit of
So,
sort of comparisonitis, bit of jealousy
mm,
maybe, but also,
mm,
yeah, disagreeing with people on the internet, doesn't, you don't doesn't mean you have to start a fight with them just because you can't agree on certain
We
issues as well. Like,
we
no.
can just scroll on by, right?
Yeah,
Like, it
that's
is
right.
perfectly okay
That's right.
to just scroll past someone that you don't agree with.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
generally go in with an attitude of thinking, positively about that person,
yeah,
and it's hard sometimes, and of course you can get sucked into the vortex of social media, but I think that's when you need to put your phone down. But yes, I thought Jessie spoke really eloquently about raising each other up as opposed to tearing each other down.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. My final little learning, I think we both agreed on this. Louise, who we spoke to, lovely Louise, who
Ugh,
found out she was adopted in her 30s. It was a really interesting story. Go back and listen if you didn't. But I loved how, she's got a dance school as one of her many jobs
mm,
and many
mm,
roles in life. And she spoke about how the third act, when it comes to theatre, is the most interesting.
it is.
I
It's
thought,
where
what
it
a great
all
one.
comes together,
That's it.
where it's
That's
like
it.
the third act is
Yeah, it's
where
their best.
it's the best act and it
Yeah,
brings everything together. And
yeah.
it
That's life.
really is
Mm,
exciting to think that
mm,
that's kind of where we're moving towards. And this is where we're going to bring it all together. It was really lovely. And,
mm,
talking to Louise was it was a beautiful story. I mean,
mm,
it's not a story,
mm.
it's not a made up story, it's her real life.
Yeah.
And she tells it in such a graceful and
Mm,
respectful and loving way, which I thought was incredible. And I guess my other big learning was, well, it's kind of two that are intertwined. It's around the psychology of change.
mhm,
And, when we spoke with Tracy, we spoke around the psychology of change and why some people find it hard and other people find it easier. And gorgeous Bron,
mm,
we spoke with Bron about the otherhood and
mm,
raising older children. Again, fabulous episode. If you haven't listened to it, go back. And how Bron is embracing that change, this next act, and being a bit woo-woo, as she said, about it all. And, really sort of nurturing herself
mm,
in that change. She
mm.
said we nurture ourselves when we have our babies, but we often don't take that time, and she's really taking that time to nurture herself.
Yeah, I thought that was really, she had a lot of things, because I think it's also really interesting speaking to women who are that little bit ahead of you. So Bron was that, and you are too, obviously, Cathy. But for me, looking ahead at having older kids, adult kids, and her saying those things about having that time again, and you saying those things too, a little bit of time where you're still busy people, but for yourself, when you can think a little bit more about that journey. And yeah, and as you hit the change, quite literally, perimenopause, menopause, yeah, very, very good to keep that in mind. A bit of self love and acceptance. I guess to round out our bonus
Mm.
episode, was there anything that you have reflected on from episode one? Episode one was when we spoke about some of the big life changes that we've gone through that kind of led us here, obviously, other than meeting at Mamma Mia and wanting to do a podcast. Was there anything that you've reflected on since in the last a few months that you have changed your mind on? Any changes that you have reflected on that you feel differently about, Cathy?
Um, I guess, well, I guess I touched a little bit on it,
Mm,
that I have always described change as my kryptonite.
mm,
And I still do think it is,
mm,
to some degree, my
mm,
kryptonite, but I think I'm embracing it a little bit better. I think I'm learning to roll with the punches a little bit better. I'm learning that change can be exciting. Change can be, it doesn't have to be a negative, like it, we often think change, oh my goodness, it's scary and it's awful and it's going to be really bad. But it doesn't have to be those things. And so I think that's it for me, like that I'm learning that it doesn't have to be so bad. I'm also learning that, being invisible, sure, it can be frustrating to be overlooked at the shops and not really see yourself represented on the television and kind of think, hey, I've got all the money, but why don't you want to market to me? But again, that doesn't really matter. I can choose to spend my money where I want to spend it on the
Mm,
things that matter to me.
mm.
Just flipping the switch a little bit, I think.
Yeah, just kind of slowly thinking, considering those big change thoughts
What about
around
you?
invisibility. Me, oh gosh, there was a couple of things I reflected on that I probably wasn't that honest about actually in episode one, where I talked about
Ooh.
not really, but my face and, how, gosh, I worry far too much, or body, physical issues and how I look and getting older really. I worry, yeah, like the chin hairs, neck sagging,
Yeah.
stuff like that. That we talked about in episode one. And I still will think about those things. It's something I'm trying to do the work on. Something I'm really trying to say to myself. I accept myself as I am, and I am aging, and it is a privilege. And I think I need to be able to accept it and move on past that a little. I'm certainly not saying that I have perfected my attitude towards aging. It's still a daily learning. But I remember in the episode one as well, I talked about how my hips, right, arthritic hips, and how they weren't really bothering me. And I think that's not true. I think that actually the physical sides of aging are sometimes just as difficult. And I do
Mhm.
struggle with that. I think I still kind of don't like thinking about it and how that might affect me getting older, and how it's already kind of affected me, and, occasional bouts of pain, or it's just not a very sexy thing to talk about. And not that this podcast is we're not talking about sexy things, or certainly not about ourselves or all the time, but I think I just brushed it under the carpet a little bit in episode one. And I just wanted to say that perhaps I wasn't being particularly honest, and that I do worry about those things, and I do worry about pain, getting older, and how I
Mhm.
can stay as healthy as I can for my kids, and also just to live a good life. Like, that's
Yeah.
really the most important thing, right? It's not about how many wrinkles I've got on my forehead, really. That's not going to be all that
Mhm.
life changing when I get older, whereas, being in permanent pain and things is. So, yeah, it's something I need to think more about and plan for, which, I try and do by staying as healthy as I can. So that's something I
Yeah.
I reflected on from episode 1. And yeah, otherwise, look, I still feel sad about the job not working out. My career is still in flux. I don't know where that's really heading, and I think that's okay. I'm trying to come to terms with that.
But I think it's important to
Mm.
reflect that the job did work out
I
for a
know,
long
and yes,
time,
yes,
and
correct.
it was your time to
Mm,
move into the next phase.
yeah.
Um, in some respects, we just outgrow things,
Mm,
for all sorts of different reasons.
yeah,
And I think perhaps that was just it,
yeah.
it wasn't that it didn't work.
No.
You still love writing, you still love Mamma Mia, you still love all the people that we worked with.
Yeah.
So you look back and you reflect on a very positive experience. So it's not that it didn't work out. It's just that
No.
it came to an end.
It came to an end. That's right. And then it's like, I think I've been one of those people that's always like, okay, what next?
Mhm.
And now I'm like,
Mhm.
I genuinely don't know. So I'm in a period of just working that out. And I think because change is inevitable in life, as some
Mhm.
of our guests pointed out, that it's just part of life, and that there is
Mhm.
no neat bow. There's no neat ending to this season. It's like we're carrying on, and we'll talk
Yeah.
more. And we'll have more reflections on our feelings about change in season 2, I guess.
And I think reflecting on the job thing for you,
Mm.
I remember when Tracy spoke to us about, leaving jobs, and she
Mm.
wasn't specifically like it wasn't a therapy session with you
No,
about leaving a job, but
I've had
she
plenty of
did
those, however.
she did touch on that we need to remember that when we leave a job, whether it's by our choice or not our choice, to give ourselves time to grieve. And
Mm.
grieving comes and goes in
Yeah.
different ways. And
Mm.
it's like the onion that needs to be peeled back in different layers.
Mm.
So give yourself time,
That's it.
like
Yeah.
the next thing will come. It might be writing a book, it
Mm.
might be who knows what it'll be.
That's right.
So,
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah. It's reframing it in a sort of acceptance thing. I'm such an impatient person that I think I
Mhm.
just need to go, "You know what? It's all right. I'm okay.
Yeah,
All is okay."
yeah. Is there anything that you still wanna do personally, or is there just too much, or, you know?
Look, I think there's many things I'd like to do in the future when it comes to big changes. Consistency, actually. So thinking about what's next and like this podcast, keeping on with it and seeing what happens, which I think is quite
Mhm,
exciting. So that's something I want to keep doing.
mhm,
Other changes, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm keeping my mind and my heart open to opportunity, which I quite like
mhm.
the feeling. What about you?
I would actually just like a period of a little bit of stability, I think,
Okay. Mm.
because I've had just quite a little bit of change, or quite a lot of change
Mm.
in a short space of time, with kids finishing school, starting
Yeah.
new job,
Mhm.
podcast, some changes in my job,
Yeah.
some more changes
Family. Yeah.
announced recently,
Okay.
family,
Mm.
part of the sandwich generation,
Yeah.
adult children, aging parents. There's lots of balls juggling in the air.
Mhm.
And to some degree, I think I'd just like a little bit of just a period of a little bit of stability
Mm.
in amongst all of the change. But I think, yeah, I just know that I want to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to
Mm.
keep doing this. And I would really like to actually start to put pen to paper, like consistently stop talking about writing my book and actually start getting some words on the page. And like Jessie reminded me and you, when we worked together and when we were
Mm.
working at Mamma Mia, we essentially wrote a book. We just
Mm.
didn't do it in one go.
Yeah. All
And
those
I don't
words.
need to write the book in one go. I
Mm.
need to bite it one little bit at a time.
Mhm.
So if I can consistently write 300 words or 500 words a day, who knows where that will take me.
Love that.
That's what I would like to do. We'll see how check back in with me
Mm.
in a little
We'll hold
while
you
and
to it. That's it.
see how
Mhm.
that's going.
Oh, love it. Okay. Well, we'll hold you to that. And in the meantime, we're going to take a little break and we'll be back in your ears with season 2 very
Early
soon.
May, I think.
Yeah. And we can't wait. It's yeah, so please share this podcast with your friends, tell the women in your life to give us a listen and we'll be very grateful. Leave us a review, all of those things. And yeah, we'll have a little break and we'll come back to you with some fabulous new guests.
Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.